can go ahead. So what we wanted to do today is just take a few minutes to update you on the work that's happening with the enrollment and facility study. Many of you, I know Ms. Morioni and Ms. Thompson actually serve on the committee, and many of you have been to some, or some of you even to all of the meetings. But we thought it would be helpful, since we are kind of at a turning point in the project, to spend a little bit of time today updating you. So what we want to do is just review what we're doing and why we're doing it, then talk about everything that's happened to date, and then provide the overview of where this is going, both in terms of the timeline and in terms of some of the scenarios that are being considered as a result of the input from the data process and from the commission. So hopefully when we're done, you'll understand where we are with the work and know what the next steps are, and to the extent that you have energy for it today, talk about any hopes and concerns that you have for that work. So I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail. You've seen this before. These are the parameters for the study. These were developed with you and have been what has governed the work of the commission. So that's the parameters, and this is the final expectations. What it is that we've asked the commission to do is to come back to you with a set of recommendations that are consistent with the data, that reflect their sort of review of the data that's been presented to them, and that has gone through a public vetting. So, we'll talk a little bit more about what the next steps are for that process, but that's what we've asked the commission to come to you with. Just a minute to sort of review. This is the high-level project schedule that we reviewed early on, and so basically you can see that we are now at the point of the arrow there. So we're approaching the section where the commission makes its recommendations, and then you take those recommendations and review them and act on them as appropriate. And so just a quick sort of, we had some give within that. The commission's report will not be in January. It will be in early February, and then so that will push the board's work to mid to late February, and then into March, which again, not ideal, but we knew going into this that we were very ambitious. As we talked about early in the process, this could be a one-year process in most cases, and we have sort of tried to compress it into close to a 6-month process. So we're about a month behind schedule as we enter the development of the recommendations, and then transferring those recommendations to you for action. Just, sort of for members of the public, for those who have not followed this closely, these are the members of the commission, and I highlighted the chair, Peter Eglinton, and then obviously our 2 board members who serve as the 2 board members, and then with, 2 city councilors and so on. Okay, so to date, the commission has met 4 times, and those are the different dates and what was covered at each of those meetings. So the sort of the arc of the work has been to sort of understand what the charge was and why we were doing this, and then follow that through to data reports on the budget. So that was sort of foundational, and that's why we're doing this, is to look for efficiencies in our budget, and sort of helping the commission understand the sort of the importance of doing this work, given that our state funding looks like it is not going to be sufficient to do the things that we are trying to do. And then We first focused on elementary capacity and usage, and I'm going to go into that in a minute, then secondary capacity and usage, and I'm going to go into that in 2 minutes, and then the last piece, which we did at this last meeting, which is the enrollment projections for the, for the next 8 years, as well as we're going to preview the conceptual scenarios that came out of the work of the commission, and that's the work that we are now sort of validating and costing out. So we're ready to move on? So any general questions before we move into the elementary capacity? So, as I think Ms. Thompson mentioned, or somebody mentioned during the board meeting today, the general sort of the headline for the elementary capacity is that we're running, I think it was Ms. Morioni. I'm trying to place who actually said it. That it was in the context of the Bayside presentation. And so the headline for this is that we're running fairly efficient in our elementary schools. Not perfect, but from the consultant's perspective, things between 75 and 85 are, that's an appropriate usage of elementary facilities. And you can see from this this chart that sort of when you look at it at the grade level, we're running fairly efficient in all of our grades. So there's not a tremendous amount of slack from that 85% level. And then when you look at it school by school, you can see that the same is true, obviously with the exception of the island schools, which we've known that's not an efficient, from this analysis, it's a, but it has other values. And then otherwise, you can see that we're running close to that 75 to 85 range. Ms. Davis?
When they're giving us the individual, at the grade level capacities, are they holding, because the island schools are just, have very bounded geographies that they serve, have they taken those out, or are those capacities? They're included in there, so I'm. Because they are so, we're talking about.
Yeah, but it's such a small number that it doesn't skew it.
That it's not skewing this data?
If it's included, it might drop it by, a fraction of a percentage point, but it's not skewing those grade level numbers.
Okay.
Just think about it. It's like 50 kids spread out over, out of a 3,500 or 3,000.
But you've got
kids,
capacity.
so.
You've got underutilized capacity. You have fewer students, but you've got capacity for more students. So it is. Is it skewing the capacity numbers?
It's again. It's like our capacity is for close to 4,000 kids, and between I think Cliff is 20 kids is what their 100% capacity would be, and Peaks is 200. We can.
I'm going to say, I've seen that building with 120 kids in it, we still had room, so.
And what do they give it here? It's 133, as they say, that's their total capacity. So, we're at, that's not, I can double check if they actually included that in this slide, but I don't think it alters it dramatically.
Okay. And like with spare classrooms and that kind of stuff, because in just thinking about how it's different. If there's a spare classroom on Cliff Island, that's not a spare classroom that helps somebody at LICEF out.
There isn't. If you go back and look at the school by school, there is, it's a one-room schoolhouse, so there is no spare room there. And I believe that there's no spare at Peaks either, now that, because somebody has moved into what the library used, so.
They do. There are spare class. I know that building very, very well, and with the number of students we have out there,
Can you, Alicia,
would
can
sort
you
of beg.
open Can you open the?
There are
school
there
by
are
school
spaces
to
we are
see
not,
if they-
no longer using as classrooms that were originally designed as classrooms and for many years were used as classrooms, so
They are used for other.
they are used for other purposes now. Yeah, because we had many more classrooms when my children were there, because we had 120 kids,
Yeah.
students, so.
And Alicia thinks that it's not included in the capacity, but if
Okay.
we can
I
always
just
go back
wanted
and we can look
to
at
double
that,
check,
so,
because
yeah.
while it's small numbers, I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't inadvertently skewing either our capacity, our percent, our utilization, or
We're
anything
quoting
else.
that we have 4 available classrooms right now. The islands are not part.
Are not part of that, okay.
That's why I'm thinking that it's not in there, because we've said that there's 4 classrooms, so.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to double check that that wasn't in there and pulling the numbers off.
Yeah. So these are the key takeaways from the consultant report. So, the headline again is that overall, we are utilizing our elementary schools fairly efficiently. I think that we have, as a district, significant special programming needs that sort of use up space. So again, to this idea that we were just talking about, that you have, special ed programming, ELL programming, talented and gifted programming, and things along those lines that actually do require space. So that's where we wind up with, you may actually have a classroom that was built to be a 3rd grade classroom that is now an ELL classroom, but there was no ELL classroom when that building was built. And so I think that that's where you wind up with those utilization rates. So I think Ms. Morioni also spoke to this, is the expansion of pre-kindergarten has an impact on the usage. So those numbers that you saw are without the pre-kindergarten expansion built in. And so in the different scenarios that we're going to be talking about shortly, when we talk about what the commission put forward, one of those pieces looks at sort of reassigning grades to schools to be able to accommodate our pre-kindergarten expansion plans. Ms. Davis?
Just wanting to make sure that we know when pre-K has been included or not. For example, we built 2 pre-K classrooms at Rowe. We have 1 pre-K class there, so we have a spare pre-K classroom. Is that showing up in these as a
No,
spare class?
it is not showing up.
So all of our
They're not
pre-K
being
is kind of
counted.
being
That's-
held out?
yes,
Okay.
it's held out, and the space is also held out.
And we also haven't noted or kind of surfaced in any of this that Ocean Avenue was designed, when it was built, to have 4 additional classrooms added to it. And that potential classrooms, which were designed into it as a result of the state process at that point, which required us to do that so that we would have room if we needed to easily add on to an existing school, that's not here either.
No, that doesn't exist, so no.
It
it's
doesn't
not.
exist,
Right.
but it is a different, its existence is not that difficult for us to make actual as it would be in any other setting. Those classrooms were designed, that building was designed to have 4 more classrooms. We know where they go, they know what they look like. The process to build those classrooms is a much shorter timeline and a much more direct process than it would be for us to build 4 classrooms anywhere else in the building, in the school district. But it's not here.
It's not included.
And it hasn't been considered in the enrollment
That's correct.
commissions. Are they aware of that? Has that been clearly
I
articulated
suspect
to
that
them?
we've discussed it in the process, but the parameters that we gave were not to think about where we could add or rebuild or do anything along those lines. So that has definitely not been, that has not been factored in.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I think the public, and for me, that's a missing puzzle piece, because this whole thing is a large puzzle to put together about how to take our existing facilities, our facilities we intend to renovate, and figure out the best way to meet our needs now and in the future, and to take off the table the fact that we have that possibility, to me, seems short-sighted in the long-term vision. But I just want to make sure that at least the board is aware of those classrooms, and and the public, since the public is listening as well, that we are not at the moment considering those, that the possibility does exist. The building was designed to have those classrooms built with the expectation that probably sometime in the future we would build there. So just wanting to surface that so that the community and the board is aware that exists.
Thank you. Ms. Victor?
And then with respect to an additional analysis that looks at expanding pre-K, I just want to clarify that that expansion is adding 9 additional classrooms and not moving towards a point where we get to universal pre-K.
That's correct.
Which would be more on the order of 20 new
20 to
classrooms
25,
total.
yes.
20 to 25.
Can I move on? Any other questions? Yeah? Okay. Secondary capacity, the story is, significantly different for our secondary schools than it was for the elementary. So where we're running elementary fairly efficient, I think we all understood this going into it, that our middle schools and elementary schools are not running as efficiently. I will point out that the middle school model by design is a less efficient model. So, the consultants, from their perspective, anything that runs at 70% is considered to be running at, highly efficient, and they don't consider things that are in the 50% range to be inefficient, given the design. So in that scenario, our middle schools overall are running right on the lower edge of efficient, but they are, they're obviously, it's 50% of the space allocation is used in the way that it was intended. So again, nothing, dramatic with the middle school in terms of the usage. I think at the high school level is where, there is I'm sorry, yeah, Ms. Davis?
Just so that since there's no key provided for this data presentation, FTE, and where we've got several different columns, could we just get an explanation of what it is we're looking at here, so that what's FTE, adjusted FTE, actual enrollment,
I actually don't remember all of this off the top of my head, and the full presentation is available, and that has the glossary in it. It's on the web page, and our last slide shows people where they can go and get all of that information, but I don't remember. I believe that's the the number of students, the equivalent of students that can be in the building, but I'm not 100% sure, and I would prefer that people actually refer to the glossary that is attached to each of those presentations. And so any other questions before I move on to the high schools? So the high schools is where the usage is slightly lower than it is for the middle schools, and particularly from the consultant's perspective is significantly lower than what they expect to see. And this is particularly true for Portland and Deering in what is considered a large comprehensive high school. So those are, from the perspective of the consultants, buildings that they consistently see running in the 85 to 90% range. And so neither one of our high schools is at that usage level. So that's where obviously there are significant opportunities, and we are going to see those in a minute in terms of the things that we are currently looking at as potential efficiencies that could result from this work. Mr. Atkinson?
When I'm hearing these benchmarks, should I be looking at column H or column D? To
H.
compare against H.
H. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the last piece in that trajectory was looking at our projections. And this slide is super busy, and I meant to print it out for you as a, not as a, and we took out, so in the PowerPoint that you have, we also included the analysis that they did to look at the previous enrollment projections that they did. We spent a considerable amount of time on this at the meeting, but when I thought about tonight and trying to just sort of do the essential, I didn't think that that was particularly useful, so I wound up taking it out of the presentation. But I forgot to ask them to not do that in the printout, so you have it in the printout. But those are the columns, those are the graphs that show the consultant's perspective on what happened with their previous analysis, and so, which was not on the money. So this is our current projections. This first half only takes you as far as resident projections, again, just to sort of understand what you're seeing. What's in gray is since their last projection to present. So those are real numbers. Those are years 2015, 16, 17, and 18. So those are not projections. Those are not forecasts. Those are actual numbers. So that basically by grade, how many kids we had each year. And then the same thing then going all the way out for 7 years ahead to 2025. And those are forecasts. So those are where the consultants have actually looked at, the cohort survival and development and things along those lines and made those projections going out into the future. So then for their report, which this is work that we're cleaning up now, they provided both the resident student totals and then the unmatched, the out-of-district, and then the total. So I would probably ask you to focus your attention on those totals at the bottom, because those are the ones, the others, the sort of the out-of-district numbers is something that we've been in the process of cleaning up, as well as, sort of enabling them to do a school-by-school analysis, which we've not been able to do because those skewed out-of-district numbers. Ms. Davis, did you have a question?
So the out-of-district numbers, and I know I was talking with some people who saw the commission's presentation as well, and trying to figure out where those fit in and to what extent are we designing our capacity to house out-of-district students.
Yeah.
And at what, so how, I think it's
So
important for us to understand.
that's why I'm sort of glossing over this, because those numbers are not accurate.
Are not accurate,
Those
okay.
numbers include sort of data errors that we had in what we sent, addresses that we relied on secondary addresses instead of primary addresses, and so that's part of it. We also have not factored in homeless students who are entitled to attend the district, and so those kids are in that. So we're trying to get underneath that a level, and that will, this is not that significant because like those numbers of kids in seats are numbers of kids in seats. The sort of projections are particularly significant when you take it down to the school level where those numbers are actually located, and you're showing that, there's a large number of kids who are out of district at Lyseth, for example, which may not be so. So that's
So we
the
should
place.
expect to see a
Yes.
presentation that's.
And again, I mean, they're doing a very substantive report. This is like one set of tables in what will be a 30-page report with lots of different analysis. So this is the punchline in that the sort of the object of this study is, are there significant changes in our overall population that would warrant doing something, either, thinking, oh, wow, we need to build, or, oh, wow, we've got,
We need to close.
Exactly.
We don't need what we've got or something. Okay.
And so the, sort of the bottom line here is that it's basically flat going out into 2025 projection-wise. There's some complexity to that in terms of the enrollment, that there is a bubble going through elementary grades, that's in upper elementary grades, that is going to influence middle school and subsequently high school enrollment, and then flatten out. So I think that is an issue that, as we look at the potential efficiencies, we need to weigh the how does that play out as we think about it, not for 2019, but for 2020 and 2021 and 2025. So I think that is the one thing that I would want to highlight at this point from it is, the bubble that's moving through is something that is an additional variable for us to pay attention to as we do that. Mr. Atkinson?
Can I ask about the bubble and how? I imagine that's fairly common, right? To have a bubble that travels through a district. So we could expect another bubble to come maybe
Possibly.
5 years
Yes.
after this.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these projections, and I think that we took those slides out, but the projections, this is an art. It's not physical science. And so it's something that, they were wrong before, and, other people have been wrong as well. So I think that you have to look at this as, this is, the application of some scientific principles to, something that could change. There could be, a complete curtailment of immigration. There could be, a new building that comes up. One of the things that came up in the discussion with the commission was a counselor talking about, had we accounted for the master plan that Portland Housing Authority has for affordable housing, and we have not. That is because the data that they used, given to us by the city, was all based on permitted and approved projects. So that's not permitted or approved. It's a vision, and it's a vision that will eventually come to fruition in some way, but that would, essentially double the number of affordable housing units, which could have impact on, young families with children moving into the city. So I think that is not accounted for. Just like, the Ocean Avenue rooms aren't accounted for. It's important to surface those. That one is not accounted for. And so, this is not a science that way.
Yeah.
Ms. Figdor and then Ms. Davis.
One other potentially significant issue that the commission talked about was the renovation of the schools, of the elementary schools. That they talked about it as a marketing effort that could result in the schools being places where more families wanted to send their kids, so you could see increased enrollment at those schools. I think they talked about that tending to happen, but it's not included in these projections.
And I think the other thing that's certainly been discussed by those who've lived through it previously is just what the effect of property tax revaluation, because when I was referring to there being 120 children on peaks, that was prior to property tax revaluation. And the population of families dropped significantly when that happened because taxes rose and people left because they couldn't afford to stay. And we've never regained those children. The people who bought houses were not folks who had children. So, we're facing another property tax revaluation, and that could have impacts as well on our families with children who, if their taxes go up significantly, may decide that they can't afford to stay.
Okay, ready to move? Mr. Norris, you look like you have a question.
What was that ideal utilization rate? Was that
For senior high school, they're saying 80 to 90%.
80 to 90? Okay.
All right, so, and this, again, I wanted to do better in this after I, met with my team today, but what I laid out for you is the sort of the various options that we are now exploring, and we need to think about these as connected to each other in ways that this long list does not convey. So in its next iteration, this will be more like, here's a K-12 expeditionary learning school that also occurs in conjunction with a consolidated 10 through 12 senior high school, a 6 through 9, two 6 through 9 middle schools and elementary schools that are not affected by that, other than one elementary school closing. So this is not a particularly helpful way of representing this, but I just wanted to at least bring to your attention some of the different things that we are costing out. And for the purposes of the costing out, these are modules, so we're looking at these disconnected from each other, but then in terms of real sort of understanding how they play out, they do have to be combined into scenarios. So. Let's walk through these first, and then let's talk about the costing out. So these are the things that came out of the conversation with the commission. One is the creation of a K-12 expeditionary learning school. So that would basically be taking Casco Bay, King, and Presumpscot in some form and bringing it together under one roof and one program. So that's something that we are exploring as is it viable, and what would it save, and what would it look like, and what would be the impact on the system overall. A consolidated 10 through 12 senior high school. So again, that one is in combination with the one above it. That K-12 expeditionary learning school presumes that it's in a current high school building, so either in Deering or in at Portland High School, and so it moves into that location. And the other building becomes the 10 through 12 senior high school for the remaining 10 through 12 students. And then it's combined, if you look at 4A, it's combined with two 6 through 9 middle schools that would be in conjunction with those two. So that's when you think of the whole sort of what does the district look like with a K-12 expeditionary learning. It's a K-12 expeditionary learning school with a 10 through 12 senior high school and two 6 through 9 middle schools with the remaining students in it. We're also looking at a grade 8 through 9 junior high school, which again, that would be combined with a consolidated 10 through 12 senior high school above it. So in that scenario, one of our high schools would be a 10 through 12, the other high school would be an 8 through 9 junior high school, and that would be coupled with option 4B, which is the two middle schools for 6 through 7th grade. So in all of those options, we go down a building. So we, are closing a middle school building or a building that where we will only have 2 middle schools in the current scenario, and we would be able to offload a building in that process. So the other one is 4C, and that's 2, 5, 6 schools, and that's a reconfiguration of our elementary schools to allow us to be able to do pre-K through 4th grade. And so that is, pre-K through 4th grade, then with the 5 through 6, the 5 through 6 buildings that would be not middle schools, they would be elementary buildings that would be devoted to 5 through 6. Option 5 is really not a novel option. It's basically we have 2 middle schools, and and we will do the due diligence around it. But we have 2 middle schools that are over 500 and one that is 450. That's primarily driven by out of neighborhood requests. So really, the solution, if we thought that had a substantive financial value, would be to enforce our current boundaries and not allow out-of-district placements, and that would get us to pretty close to 500 across all 3 of our schools. Then the other 2, just one is to reconfigure our elementary schools to efficiently distribute students across the school. So that could be just plain redistricting, so that we make sure that we're using all of the space at row to 80, 85%, and sort of under moving kids out of other places, and in the process looking at the potential for eliminating an elementary school. Highly unlikely, but that would be part of the analysis that we would do for that, as well as creating more of those sort of 4C options. So creating K-1-2 buildings, creating pre-K-2 buildings, or 3rd through 5th buildings and things along those lines. So we will have a variety of configurations for that. And then this, one of the themes that came out of the work of the commission really was, are there opportunities in this process, even if there's nothing else that we do, to relocate Bayside, our administration offices, or even Portland Adult Ed into available space within our, particularly our underutilized space in our high schools. And so that's part of what we will also be assessing as a part of these options. Alicia, you wanted to talk a little bit about how we're costing this out?
So I wanted to talk about how we're costing these options out. So what we've done is we've taken our current staffing costs at all of our schools, and we've been dividing them by the number of students there, so we can get down to like a regular education per student number. For example, there's an elementary, all the elementary schools are run fairly similarly. Staffing is similar, so any variations we're seeing, we're looking into. It's usually, there's more experienced staff here, or vice versa. So essentially at the middle school level, we're coming up with a number. At high school level, we're coming up with a number. And the way that we're going to cost these out is to basically reallocate the number of students in a school times a per student number. So we are not going through and moving individual teachers to different places. It's going to be a more general sort of on average number. Throughout this process, we're going to be as conservative as possible. We do not want to sell something that we don't think is going to materialize any savings. Another thing that I just wanted to highlight is we're not going to apply those same percentages to our special ed or ELL staff, because no matter what, those are the services we're providing to our students, and those costs are going to remain. We're not losing any students in the process, so those really aren't going to be considered as like savings opportunities. It's really more on the regular ed spectrum. Known costs obviously are building costs. We're not applying administrative costs on like a per student level, that's on a per school level. So we know, at a high school on this many students, how many administrative staff, how many secretarial staff, and that kind of thing we'll have. So those are sort of being worked in differently, but that's essentially what these savings are going to look like. As the superintendent mentioned, we're going to kind of put them into blocks and then, place them into different scenarios together. The consultants did say, try to keep them as separate as possible so they're not contingent upon one another, so that you could sort of take this piece and see how that works together. So that's sort of the effort that we're going to be making. So I didn't want anyone to think we're, coming up with detailed budgets for every single one of these scenarios. We're going to apply some costs over a number of students and see how that works out. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Am I recalling correctly that this was part of the work that that Davis had offered to do as the more comprehensive plan that the district has taken on?
Yes. They've been really helpful in giving us a lot of their spreadsheets to show how they're coming up with these figures. Because of our Department of Education mandated chart of accounts, we actually are really able to compartmentalize sort of regular ed, special ed, ELL. We're able to separate those very easily across all of our schools. So we're feeling good about getting to our costs, and now we just have to figure out how to put them back together again.
Any other questions about the options or the costing, Ms. Davis?
Having observed the development of these options, which was pretty much just the commission kind of going off in small groups and brainstorming, and remember, this is a commission of lay people in some cases with some professional staff, but this is probably new work for them. How do other people in the community or other board members or other staff make a recommendation to be considered? Because one of my concerns is that this is one night's brainstorming.
Well, there's more to it than that. But to answer your question, Peter Eglinton has received additional feedback from people in different options, and some of those are baked into this. So.
But if the community watching or a board member sitting here, there's an option. I'd love to have costed out that's not up here.
Please send that to,
Okay.
You can send that to me directly, you can send it
Okay.
to Peter Eglinton, would be happy to include that.
So if members of the public, staff, other people have suggestions that they don't see on this list that they think ought to be considered by this commission and by this board, then they should forward them to you or to Mr.
Absolutely.
Eglinton.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Soon. Yeah, no, I think that's, will there be staff recommendations?
I'm not sure.
Okay. In the past, thinking back, at one time, we really had an approach as a board to thinking about our education portfolio and offering options, educational options, and some of that was in grade configuration, some of that was in model and different, that's some of where IB at the primary years came from. This seems to me like a place where that ought to be a part of the conversation, is to think about not just seats, but our ability to also improve our educational offerings and our capacity to essentially enhance that portfolio. That was seen by the board at one time as a very important marketing tool, that we chose to offer IB, International Baccalaureate primary years, because we were the only district in the state that was offering that. Is this commission, or is there a way to feed some of those ideas or concerns into the thinking, so that we don't make a decision that's based on seats that eliminates or disrupts, or has the board decided to move away from? I guess it's somewhat a question. Are we still committed as a board to that strategic plan of enhancing our educational portfolio as a marketing tool for our district? And how does that fit into this? And are we thinking about that?
refer you back to the parameters for the study and that sub-bullet under the first bullet, which we had substantive conversation about at the time that we started the project, which was that programming options may be the result, and so that that K-12 EL is an example of that, but they're secondary to the cost reduction potential. I don't think that, we've done, this is why you ask, are these staff recommendations? These are right-sizing and efficiencies that may have programmatic impact. And so we have programmatic requirements like what we talked about today with Bayside that are critically important to the work that we're trying to do consistent with the Portland Promise. This is to look for efficiencies, and so these are the parameters that we gave to the commission. These are the parameters that I've been operating on, and that's why I start, pretty much all of these meetings with these are the parameters, and that is not sort of looking at the portfolio overall. That's not what that group is, charged with. It doesn't mean that it's not what the board should be looking at when the board gets those recommendations and looks and assesses, you could save this, but the impact is that. I think that is absolutely the right conversation for the board to have. And, but it will not come from so this is, it's not not supposed to be about dreaming potential new programs. It's really about looking for ways to run more efficiently.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Ms. Figler.
Sorry. It is hard, it's challenging to look at some of these options just from an efficiency perspective when we understand that some of them are kind of wholly inconsistent with kind of our community values. So I do just want to question, I appreciate the exercise, but it also sounds like quite a lot of resources to evaluate the cost. And so I'm wondering, and I was at the meeting where the brainstorm happened, and so I'm wondering, and maybe it's not a lot of resources, but I'm wondering, was there consideration of actually going through and having the committee vote on options to prioritize rather than considering kind of any idea that an individual member had?
We did not. We didn't prioritize. We wound up with not a huge number of options. We wound up with what you saw up there. While I think that they may be, I think that the conversation about whether it's consistent with the community values or not is the conversation that, again, that's the portfolio and community values conversation that you as a board have the purview over. We gave the commission a very specific charge to look at efficiencies and ways to arrive at that based on the data that they were considering, which was, data about our, our budget, our enrollment, and our projections for enrollment, and our current usage of the footprint that we currently have. So that's not a prioritization. It's like, what can we think of based on all of this and our understanding of, what's possible that we would like to, see played out. We will, as a first level, analyze whether it's doable or not and what the consequences and implications are. So when you get the K through 12 EL, you'll have to grapple with, are those choice or is that a neighborhood school? Is that we're actually plucking Presumpscot with its 250 kids, King's 550 kids, and Casco Bay's 400 kids, and just relocating them to a central building? If I'm a middle school kid, what happens to me if I want to go to Casco Bay? Can I go to Casco Bay? Does that mean that nobody else that didn't go to those schools? So those are all of the issues that we will need, that will go into, sort of figuring out whether you do that or not. But we will also cost it out and say, like, if we did it in this configuration, this is what it would save. And if we did it in this other configuration, this is what it would save. So, but those are the conversations that the board has to have, not the commission.
And I was just going to say, having observed the commission sharing these, I think I would remind the board that it was a group of community people, and that I didn't hear them sharing their ideas, saying, this isn't, they were sharing ideas that were consistent with that group's values, I think. Whether those values extend beyond that small group or not, I don't know. But they were generally enthusiastic and very interested in the ideas that they put forth. I didn't have the sense that they were putting forth, and you were there, Marnie, as well, I think.
I can speak if you want me to about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to make it extremely clear in my mind, these were just ideas. These haven't been in any way that the commission is supporting any of these ideas. So I just want to make sure that all board members know right now, these are literally like on the back of a napkin going, what about this idea? What about this? Because we were divided into 3 groups, and we were literally asked, what would you do if you need to look at cost efficiencies or efficiencies? All these things right now, I wouldn't be able to say that I loved any of them. I mean, and so the commission has not fully come together, nor have we heard the final recommendations from the experts that we have paid a lot of money to hear their perspective. So that's our next meeting, and I don't know what will eventually come. It may not be any of these things, honestly. It might be something else that the experts will bring to us to say, well, this is actually something that could be potentially a little easier to swallow. So right now, I don't want us to get hung up with this, and honestly, considering the time it is right now, I think it's kind of wasting our time right now to getting too far into the weeds on this. But I appreciate you're absolutely right around the programming. That wasn't our charge at all. And since we first, developed the commission, we weren't tasked with that at all. So I completely agree with you that that's going to be a lot to discuss amongst the board and the community. And so there's a lot of layers or levels to be done. This is just I think more of an FYI where we are in the process.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the intent of tonight, is just to make sure that the entire board, not just the ones who have been able to follow the discussions in detail, know where we've started, where we've come, and where we are now. And so this is the sort of the roadmap going forward. Starting next week, we will have preliminary information for the commission to consider around the potential savings. Then we want to bring the commission back together to develop recommendations based on that, on those options, and then go out to the public for public feedback around that so that they can develop their final recommendations and turn that over to the board. So that's kind of the month of January, the end of January, and all the way into the beginning of March. So that's what I think you can look forward to as the next steps. And that's it.
Can you tell us meeting dates? Are there specific meeting
We
dates
don't
scheduled?
have them yet. I'm trying to get the consultant's ability to be here, and also working internally to figure out when we can turn this around. But our goal is to bring people the data next week sometime. It'll be towards the end of next week, and then, we'll try to get some dates for the other meetings as well, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.